Great to see everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces and some familiar names and a few new names and faces too. So that's great. Hi, Maria. It's great to see everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here for our final broadcast of the virtual native storytelling. Happy to have you all here. I'm going to let everybody get settled in. There's still a few connecting to their audio. So we'll let everybody get settled in virtually, and then we'll get started. Again, happy to have you with us. Let's see here. I'm going to disable that waiting room so people aren't getting held there. There we go. There we go. I think everyone should be able to come in now. Not getting held up. Okay, great. Okay, we've got a few people joining yet a little bit later. I have disabled the waiting room, so hopefully no one will get trapped in there. I'm going to pull up my slides real quick, my introductory slides, and then I'll turn the floor over to our storyteller today. Let's see, I'm just trying to get a sense too of who's here. I'm keeping my eyes peeled for some of our previous storytellers. I've invited them to join us for the second hour to perhaps reminisce a bit and maybe share a little. And as we put some closure on this year-long event, it was July of 2020 that we began broadcasting this virtual native storytelling hour with all of you. So I've been privileged and honored to be part of this, and it's great to see so many of you that have attended almost all of these here today. I want to just again give you appreciation and thanks for that kind of patronage. So let me pull up my intro slides, and then we're going to get started. Let's see if I can pull this off here. Okay. Are you all seeing the screen there? I'm going to see if I can do this without causing any trouble. There we go. Yeah. So again, I want to just welcome everyone to our virtual native storytelling hour. This is our final event of this series, and again, I just want to say what an honor it's been to be part of this, and I'm humbled by that. And I want to once again thank you all for joining us today for this ongoing series. My name is Steve Steiny. I'm one of the program managers here at the National American Indian Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center, funded by SAMHSA. The content of today's broadcast is created by the presenter and does not represent the views of SAMHSA, HHS, or the National American Indian Alaska Native, ATTC. This event is brought to you by the National American Indian Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center, which is located at the University of Iowa. We are part of the ATTC network with centers all around the country, including our national center and a coordinating center. As I mentioned, this project is supported by and funded by SAMHSA, and the content is developed by the presenter. It does not represent or reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or our center. Following today's event, we will send out a follow-up email, which will include a link to a short survey. This survey will allow us to continue providing events such as this. Oftentimes, we will also include recordings or other documents related to this presentation. I'll check with our storyteller today to see if it's okay if we share the slides that he'll present. And if I get his approval, I can share a PDF version of those slides. There are no CEUs available for today's event, but we are happy that you're here, and we would really appreciate you completing the short evaluation survey. It's very important to our center and to our funders to ensure that we can continue to provide events such as this. Your participation in this survey is voluntary, but we would really appreciate you taking a few minutes to help us out by completing this survey. You can skip any questions you would like, and all your responses are kept confidential and cannot be linked to you in any way. Please reach out to myself or anyone here at the Native Center for Behavioral Health, ATTC, and we're happy to answer your questions about that survey. I know we are gathered here virtually today, but I wanted to take time to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken and inhabited. Please take a moment to read this important land acknowledgement, which was created by 3 members of our team, Ella and Keely Driscoll, and our co-director, Sean Baer. Thank you. So you all are muted currently, but we will have some time at the end and in between the first and second hour. If we are in a position to use that second hour, we will certainly set aside some time for questions that you can ask our storyteller. And any other comments. You can also utilize the chat box. So set aside what you're working on, close all other programs and windows, and sit back and enjoy the next hour as our storyteller, Mr. Robert Begay, shares with you this story, which is the use of the ecosystem for positive mental and behavioral health, Navajo traditional perspective. Happy to have him here. And I've been very blessed and honored to have Robert be part of this project, and we're happy to have him here today. So I will turn the floor over to Mr. Robert Begay, and I'm going to pull up his slides in the interim as he introduces himself. So I'm going to stop sharing and want to turn the floor over to Robert.
Good morning, Stephen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Robert Begay. Out of Tohan Slow to buy buses chin Kiani, that's a shadow touch, none is touching. Now, down the net touching, that's in Nalaho. Although my first clans are born near the water people, I am born for the Edgewater people. My maternal grandparents are the Towering House, and my paternal are the Corn people of the Red Streak running into water. Clan, and I am from New Mexico. I am Navajo, and with that out of the way, let's go ahead, Steve. Just waiting for the slides to come up, Steve.
Yep, I'm just give me one moment here. I'm going to get that happening. I'm going to make sure I've got the right PowerPoint open.
Hope everybody's having a good day.
Okay, I think I've got it here, Robert. Just one moment. And
so I kind of changed the when I was doing this presentation, I kind of looked at it really quickly. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is how do we use as Native peoples or any peoples, any indigenous people or non-indigenous people or non-Native peoples, how can we use the ecosystem as a part of using the ecosystem and accessing their healing powers to live a good life. So again, this is using the ecosystem for a healthy lifestyle.
Robert, can everybody see this okay? Are you guys seeing this okay? There we go. Okay.
Next. So the reason why it says, how do Navajos use the natural environment and the ecosystem for a healthy life? Now, I'm using Navajo because that's where I grew up. And again, you know, I'm not saying Navajos know everything or anything, but any peoples, native or non-native or indigenous or non-indigenous, can really think about one of these issues is how do we access the natural environment to help us to live a healthy life, both mentally, behaviorally, and so forth. Next, Steve. So there's a couple of things that we have to think about first. One of the core issues is that we as five-finger people, at least Navajo people, this is the things that we have to think about, is that we as five-finger people, that we are only one of the 1,000 life forms or the hundreds of thousands of life forms on the reservation, not on the reservation, I'm sorry, on the earth, in the universe, that we occupy the earth and the universe. We are part of it. It is very core issue. Where do we belong and how do we belong to this universe and this earth? We share this with other beings that have different powers. They have healing powers, but at the same time, they also have powers to harm. And again, these are really specific things that we have to think about before we move into talking about the subject at hand. How do we access the ecosystem for a healthy lifestyle? Again, all Native peoples across the reservation, the United States, and also North America, South America, and even the world, and even non-indigenous people have a lot of these things that teach these things, and it's some that I think a lot of times in this Western world we kind of get away from it. But again, it's just something like this that we have to think about, and this is something that we teach. Hopefully, I try to teach every time I do ceremonies and stuff like that. Next. The other issue is then that we as individuals, just as individuals, we're never alone as an individual. We're not the only person on this earth. We're not the only beings on this earth. We live among and we're part of this universe, both on the earth and in the sky. We have all living things across that are with us. We have family members, you know, we have family members we grew up with, we have parents, we have grandparents, and so forth. But we also have friends, you know, friends that are extended friends and so forth. Friends that are longtime friends, then friends that come in and out of our lives, some that we never see again. But those are the things that what I'm trying to say is that we're never alone. Then we have friends, we are not alone because we have spirit of past family members. This is some that in Navajo, or at least we talk about, is that when people pass and when they're grieving, is that, you know, they think life ends there. In Navajo, we always talk about this. When somebody passes from how we see them today and how we talk to them, and they die and pass on, it's really their teaching and their thoughts and their teachings and the things that we experience with them, that we talk with, and how they taught us and how their knowledge is passed on to us. We keep that in our heart. We keep that in our minds and our teachings to pass on to the next generation. And we continue to do that over and over and over. And a lot of that is what we call everlasting life. It is some that there is a belief where Navajos, or at least traditionally, that Navajos go back to the ecosystem. There's no such thing as heaven or hell or anything like that. In a real traditional perspective, as they go back and become part of the universe, become part of the ecosystem, become part of the weather system, and so forth. This is some that we teach. And then I know there are some of our people, all 5 finger people. I see this every day in Gallup, New Mexico. I see Navajos that, they have signs. They're starting to have signs that I'm homeless, I'm alone, please help. They have signs like this. And it's more prevalent today now in Gallup, New Mexico, or border towns across the Navajo Nation. But again, it's some that when they say that they're alone and stuff, which is, I think, at some point, they need to realize, or at least we failed as parents, to teach them that they are never alone. They reside on the earth, which we call our mother. And then our father, we're in between our father and our mother. And then so we're right in the middle of our father and our mother, the earth, and then the sky. So we're not always alone. We're never alone. And then we're among all living things, maybe 5 other 5 finger people, but all wildlife, insects, the air, the rivers, and stuff like that. They all live, and we're never alone by ourselves in this world. And it's some that we have to think about before we move forward. Next. So in Navajo, there are 4 major elements. These elements are really the core of certain of Navajo culture. Next. One is Mother Earth, and the earth, and it is, you hear this all the time. It's sometimes I call it cliche, but it is our earth. Everything that is created on the earth, even today, comes from the natural resources or the physical resources of the earth. We live on the earth, and we live between the sky and the earth. We are the children and the grandchildren of the universe. This is how we greet. And we talked about, and the last time we talked about the relationship, how do we relate not only to our family members, but also we extend that to other non-Navajo people. How do we greet them through relationship? But also, we also talked about in the last presentation, how it extends to the universe, which includes the earth, and all the things that live within the earth, above the earth, and fly above the earth. How do we greet those? Again, we are the children and grandchildren of the universe. Again, this is specific to Navajo. Next. Water. Water sustains life. This is the other element, the second element, water. Everything that we use has to have some type of water in it. Okay, so this is next, Steve. The other one is air. All living things require air. It may be not for animals or insects that live in the earth itself. They may not require air, but at some point, the elements of air is what they use. Next. Fire. Fire is really, even though it's man-made most of the time. Again, we use fire today, not only for warmth, but to cook our food and so forth. Navajos think fire is a living thing. When Navajos today, and you see this, and you hardly see this anymore, is that when Navajos traditionally in Navajo, older Navajos do this, is that when they cook on the fire, they always feed the fire. And they always talk to it or pray to it, say, here's my offering for cooking the food. So they give the food that they cooked on the fire, and they give it back to the fire. Again, it's a living being. Next. I'm looking at the time here, so I'm kind of racing through this. And again, it's something that we want to talk, and I want to leave some time for some questions. But from my view on this, my personal view on this is there are really 2 different separate ways of accessing the ecosystem for a healthy life. One is really what we call it, or at least I call it, an established way. And this is really talking about how Native tribes or Navajos in general access the healing powers of the ecosystem. And it's really through ceremonial procedures and ceremonial ways. And in most cases, it really needs the assistance from a knowledgeable traditional practitioner, maybe a medicine man, and Navajos, what we call hatafis, or a traditional practitioner, an herbalist, and so forth. But at that same time, what happens there is that when you actually do this, is that you really need a family support. Family support meaning that who's going to help you with the resources that is needed for the ceremony, who's going to cook for the medicine man, who's going to help you through that whole procedure and stuff like that, somebody to assist you. But the big thing here is that who you're going to hire to or make payment to help you access the powers of the ecosystem. Again, it's really most of the time is through family support. The other thing I didn't put on here is it really requires resources such as monetary. You got to pay the practitioner or the medicine man to perform those ceremonies. And for good reasons. You got to pay the medicine man or the hatafi or something like this. It's because they spent 10, 20 years trying to learn this. However, it's not because of that. It is really because payment is really because it is their protection. They, as medicine men or hatafis, do have family members, do have children, and they need some type of payment, maybe different resources, food, monetary, stuff like that, but something to use as a shield for themselves and for their kids and their grandkids. And some of the things that we do, medicine men do, or colleagues do, they always think about not only the patient, but their immediate family too. The second way to access the ecosystem for a healthy lifestyle is really basically an individual. It's based on the individual. It's really some that you don't need, or at least I think, you don't need anybody outside. You don't need to access those healing powers or to make you feel good or to promote your healthy life. It's really based on who you are. And you do it by yourself. And you do it a lot of times in solitude. And then you're taking the time, and then when in scheduling is always a big issue, especially when you do it like the established ceremonial ways. You got to make sure that the coffee is free or the medicine man's free, or your family members, can they help out at this time? But if you do it individually, you can do this on a daily basis. You can do it consistently to promote your healthy life. This is one of the things that I think a lot of the times we fail, or at least myself, I fail to say this to young kids on Navajo, that you do have the power and the resources and the opportunity to promote your self-health. And it's however, a lot of the times our kids really think, well, you know what, I'm not a medicine man, I'm not worthy. It's not about that. You can actually do this individually and you can go forward. We have a lot of our Native Americans kids on the reservation, at least on border towns, that are, really don't have that type of resources to hire a practitioner and so forth. Again, this is all done individually. A lot of this stuff, the knowledge comes from only parents, somebody that you have mentioned that you met throughout your lifetime. And it is some that we kind of oversee and overlook in trying to get well or to promote our healthy life ways. Next. So let me talk a little bit, some examples, ceremonial ways. So what do we talk about? We hire a practitioner, a coffee, a medicine man, whatever you want to call them. We call them hatafis. It's just something in Navajo. So what do they do? They have actual formal training. They do formal prayers, formal songs, coupled with formal procedures. And again, those are the things that they do train for. all Native American tribes, I'm sure, or nations have the same thing as we do on Navajo. And then we make offerings with songs and prayers, depending on the patient's need and depending on their request. The offerings and songs are made in those in to address those issues. A lot of times we make offerings to natural elements. We make offerings to the earth. If somebody fell on the ground or they hit the ground or hit the earth, there are offerings, there are prayers to request for their healing power. The water, the air, the wind, the wildlife, and so forth. There's one thing that we have to think about, or at least on Navajo, is that within Navajo is that a lot of our environment, the ecosystem, the animal, the wildlife, they do have powers to heal, but at the same time, they also have power to harm. They have powers that can harm Navajo or five-fingered people. So again, this is why we make offerings. And it's really talking about keeping things in balance. We talked in the last two presentations, we talked about trying to keep things in balance. And it's one of those real simple rules. You know, you don't know what black is unless you know what white is. You don't know what sacred is unless you know what evil is. And so again, those are the things, they balance each other. If you have one side, if you have too much sacredness, then that becomes dangerous. So you got to offset it. And that's just one of the philosophy in Navajos. I guess if you really think about it, it's probably the yin and yang thing, but Navajos really practice a lot of this traditionally. One of the things is then in ceremonial ways, you also can collect plants with or without the patients. I know my mother-in-law, she's an herbalist. When people ask her to make herbs for them, she will actually take him out there to the plant that she thinks is going to help him, and she makes a prayer and she makes an offering, a payment, asking the plant for their healing powers to heal her patient. I mean, that's just something that they do. And they have specific ceremonial names and so forth. Again, those are the things for medicinal plants, but also not just for physical ailments, but for psychological, behavioral, and mental issues that the patient might have. And they take them out there and gather the medicinal plant to address some of those issues. A lot of the things that we do on Navajo is that we use a lot of mountain smoke. We use mountain smoke with songs and prayers. A lot of times it's just songs, and we smoke mountain tobacco with songs. And really mountain tobacco, when you smoke it, it's really a lot of it in general really is to focus on your cognitive, your thinking, your thoughts, is really to straighten that out. Sometimes people get lost in their thoughts and they worry about it, and their mind really gets jumbled up. Mountain tobacco on Navajo is what we call dihnutle, but it is some that we really think about in trying to settle down and help the person to really reset and reset their minds, and to put them back in focus on their goals and their dreams and so forth, and going forward. Steve, next. So now let's talk about, now I'm going to switch gears here. Now we're going to talk about the individual. I think the individual part of this is really the important part. We can show, and I always tell our kids and the people that I do ceremonies for, is really to show them we can do a ceremony, we can do the prayers, we can show you the path, we can pray for you, we want to, we can show you that path, but it is your decision. Your decision, and the decisions that you make do have consequences. And the decisions that you make will also guide you to a negative life or a positive life. But a lot of that knowledge comes from parents, their mentors, their medicine men, who they want to talk to, or their teachers, or their counselors, whoever they ask for. But again, it is all some that they do for themselves, and it's that responsibility belongs to the individual. A lot of the times, these practices is really done in private and done in solitude. When you get on to, today I had a bad day, you want to sit aside and just be by yourself. You take the time, and you don't need to schedule anybody, a medicine man or family member or anything. You do this on your own. And it's really, you control that schedule. And you do it during the time when you think you need it, or when you're distraught, or you're grieving and say, hey, I need to take time off. For a lot of times myself, those are the things that you do. The other thing, the important thing about this is that you do it for prevention and to promote a healthy life. You do it on a daily basis, you do it consistently. And it really promotes active learning. The last time I did this, what else can help me? So who do I ask? I go to my mentors, I go to my parents, or go to a good friend, or somebody you have confidence in that will steer you, that give you knowledge to say, you do it this way, you don't do it this way. But it's really controlled by the individual himself. Next, Steve. One of the things, and some of the example is smoke in solitude. Use natural smoke. Don't use cigarette. At least in Navajo. I mean, I guess you could use cigarettes, commercial cigarettes. That's fine with me. But the point is that mountain smoke or mountain tobacco, really, it was created to really address your thoughts, your cognitive, your worriness, how you think about yourself and how you fit in it, how you experience something and you're thinking twice about it, how you're afraid of things, how you're uncertain about the next thing that's going to happen. But you can take that tobacco and sit there by yourself and think about it and meditate and to really refocus. I mean, in Navajo, that is one of the reasons why we use a lot of mountain tobacco. And there's quite a bit of different mountain tobaccos on Navajo that we use, depending on what you were taught or who you get it from. Okay. Next, Steve. Making offerings to the natural environment. This is something that you don't need an hatati or a medicine man to make those offerings. You can do this by yourself. Whatever offerings you make. In Navajo, we use corn pollen or different pollens, depending on what you want to do. In most cases, it's corn pollen. You go to a stream, you go to a plant, you go to Talking Rock, or you go to certain places that you think is sacred, that you think is, or you've been taught that are living, that have healing powers. Again, a lot of this knowledge comes from somebody from your upbringing or somebody you cross paths with, from a good friend, from a mentor, and so forth. And you go over there and then make a prayer to it, to the natural. It might be a stream, it might be lightning struck tree, it might be something. Depending on where you learned that. It can be mostly anything you want, as long as it's you were taught. You can meditate, you can do it on your own. You don't have to ask anybody else, you do it on your own. And you just sit down there all by yourself and pray what's going on, or even just talk to it, to get it off your chest, to get it off your mind, to make you feel good. And those are the things that we do, and we use the natural environment to talk to. Remember, the natural environment, animals, springs and stuff, they are living beings. They do have healing powers. Next, Steve. The other thing is plants. Medicinal plants, or plants are really important to not only Navajos, but all Native peoples and all peoples. How do we access their powers? If you were taught what herbs to use for, let's say, sore for a headache, to numb your teeth, something like that. If you want to do that, by all means. If you don't have that kind of knowledge, the individual can seek that out. And remember, individual self-help with the ecosystem is really an active learning. You want to go out there and actually learn from somebody. It doesn't have to be Navajo. It doesn't have to be within the tribe. You can go outside of, okay? And then the other thing is then, if you do, it's a very simple thing. My wife and I walk all the time. We try to, and during our walks, we always grab a little piece of sage just to smell it or taste it. Sometimes my wife collects a few, makes tea out of it. Even by smelling the sage really gives you that sense of it excites your taste buds, the smell, the aroma, to remind the individual that they are alive. They are alive. To feel and smell to see. I don't know how to say that in English. I'm trying to think about this. Again, a lot of this stuff I try to think about in Navajo and trying to translate it into English, and it's very hard for me sometimes. But that smell and the taste of sage, or it can even be any plant that you think really arouses your senses, your taste, your smell. And that really tells you that you are a live person. You are a living being among the ecosystem. But it's another plant that tells you that by just collecting that. Next. So what do you do? Sweat lodges. I hear about sweat lodges all the time. I do sweat all the time. And not ceremonially. You do it by yourself. You don't have to have a ceremony. You don't have to use it in the sense where you got to do it. I do it because there's a couple things. I do it on a weekly basis. It's really just to rest, to rejuvenate after a hard week of, just meetings and so forth. And it's non-ceremonial. In Navajo, you just sweat. Well, there are specific ones, but ceremonial sweat lodges are very, in my view, are no longer practiced. There are some within bigger ceremonies that are done, but sweat lodges are really done today, really to help the individual. You don't have to have a gathering. You can do it by yourself if you have a sweat lodge, if you know how to do it. Again, it's non-ceremonial. It's just really to rest, to rejuvenate, to put you in a mind where you're for the next week, for something that you're worried about, or just to feel good about yourself. Again, this is something that it doesn't have to be ceremonial. You don't need anybody else to do it. You can do it by yourself. Next. Okay, so rain. Sit quietly. Rain is that's one of those things we've always been told. I've always been told when I was a kid, when it rains, sit still, don't run around, don't make noise. And my parents would always used to yell at me, "There's always a duck, kid," and they would say it that way. So we don't know why. At the time, I did not know why my parents or my grandparents would kind of used to use harsh words to tell me to sit down and shut up or sit still. Well, the reason why is that Navajos believe that at least their mother changing woman once said before she left to the West Coast or to the Pacific Ocean, she said she will check on her children through rain. And that is probably one of the reasons why our parents said, sit still. In addition to that, for changing woman checking on her children, we as our children are changing woman, the rain is also blessing all peoples, the earth and stuff like that. These are the rain people blessing the earth, not only blessing the five-finger people, but all living things on the earth. And this is why we have to keep reverent. And those are the things but at the same time, while you listen to the rain, it makes you meditate, makes you contemplate where you belong in this ecosystem, or it makes you think about how should I address a specific issue, or how should I address my, some that's been bothering me, or some I cannot overcome. How do I go about it? But it really gives you, at least in this time, what we call the gentle rain. There are rain that have like thunder to it, lightning and stuff like that. Even then, you want to stay calm and stuff like that. But it does make you think about the negative things and the positive things in your life and how to improve your life. Next. Smudging. I think this is, I might be wrong, but a lot of the time, this is probably some sage, I don't know. But a lot of times, at least I use, really is cedar. During the wintertime, when there's fire, we have fire in the morning. I like to get up real early in the morning and put out a couple charcoals and put cedar on. Really just to get that smell through the house, get my children to smell it. And that's really some that makes you think about where you belong in this earth and where you are, your role as a parent, your role as a student, your role as an individual in whatever life you live in or whatever life you lead. Those are the things that you do. And you don't need anybody. You can just gather cedar here. And if it's sage or if it's this plant here, do it. I mean, it's some that it's for your health and you're doing it for a reason. And the only person you need to justify it to is to yourself. That's the very important thing, is you're doing it for yourself. Okay, next. Hiking. A lot of the things, people hike all the time. Again, you do it by yourself. You're among yourselves. If you live in the city and if you have a park, do it. If you live in the city and do it down the street, I mean, there's all that hustle and bustle and stuff like that. But walking is really one of those things that really puts you in tune of your surroundings. If it's in the country, by all means. If there's a stream or there's something like that, all the things that you do during hiking, it's one of those things that you can do by yourself. And it promotes healthy lifestyle. It improves your physical being, your body, and so forth. But it also clears your mind. But you do it among your environment, the ecosystem, and in the natural world. It may be in the city, but you can still do it. Thanks. Next. My personal favorites. I like to smoke. Mountain tobacco. I don't smoke it for enjoyment. I smoke it really for, in the evenings. My kids do. Sometimes they ask me, can I smoke? And mountain tobacco and stuff like that. By all means, do it. It's one of those things that really calm me, to think and refocus, to recenter my life. Sometimes as a lot of people do, we kind of get lost on a daily basis. I come home kind of stressed out and kind of I try to leave my work at work. When I come home, I try to leave come home and focus on my family. So, but those are the things that, but smoke, mountain tobacco smoke is really one of those things that really puts me in the mind. And do it as a family, not only as an individual, but we do it as a family with my kids and stuff like that. Or if they're having a pipe with the mountain tobacco, they'll ask and say, do you want some? Or they'll come over or, bless me with it and stuff like that. It's a good practice. The other one is, again, I kind of talked about it earlier. During the winter, I take cedar and burn it on charcoal in the house. Those are the things that I do. And if you want to bless yourself, by all means. Some that, you don't need anybody to help you, or you can do it on your own. And if you have children, if they want to take part of it, by all means. Okay. One of the things that I do, back one more, Steve. One of the other things is when I'm tired, I go down, once in a while, I'll go down to Colorado River. And once in a while, I'll go outside. It's really, because we're in the Southwest, I'll lie on the ground. When I'm tired, I'll just lie on the ground. And the heat from the sun into the ground on the earth is really soothing. It makes you rest. I mean, that's just something that I learned how to do. I kind of stumbled on it by accident. One day I was so tired, I just laid down on the ground, on bare ground outside. And by the time I got up, and which was about 10 minutes later, I was so rejuvenated. Now that's a common practice I do every Sunday. And then conduct sweat lodges on a consistent basis. It doesn't have to be. I do it on every week, every Sunday. Now I have people coming over just to participate and sweat along, and it's a good way to get not only your immediate family, but extended family to join in, just to talk and so forth. And they'll ask you, how you doing? How you doing? You need help and stuff like that, or just common jargon, talking with each other and so forth. And then horseback riding. I love the horseback ride. I do it all the time. It doesn't matter if it's in the mountains or where we live. It is something that really, really I enjoy. And sometimes I do it by myself. Sometimes my kids come along. But a lot of the times I do it by myself. And it's something to be among not only the earth, but among the ecosystem. But it's really sharing that environment with, you know, at least in my case, my horse, you know. And it's one of those things that I think about. Next, Steve. But again, the point here is really the individual is really to help them, to show them that they're not helpless, that we live in a universe, in an ecosystem, that we're part of it, that all living things, which includes us, have power to heal and power to harm. But to live a good life, you don't need an institution. But the important thing is really the prevention of it. How do we access the healing powers to make you whole, to make you to think about that you are not powerless, that you have things that you live among, on, and so forth to help you with your everyday life and to get some real good positive outcomes. And really to address, or at least try to use our environment to prevent certain things, and as a prevention tool. And it's one of those things that I think is very important, especially for our younger generation, at least among Native American people, is that a lot of our Native American young generations think they're alone. They're not alone. It's just that at least my thought is, we as parents sometimes fail to teach those things. And it's something that we need to continue to move forward. Next, Steve. Again, this is really the end of my presentation. The one thing I want to leave here with this is that we, as all five-finger peoples, including Native Americans, Indigenous people, and non-Indigenous people, that we have, at least we have this type of information, we have this type of knowledge that we need to continue to promote, to teach to our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. And it's something that in Navajo, at least from the way I was taught, is that from my father, is that he says, I've lived my life, now it's your life to live on. And then he says that we do this not just for myself, but generations to come, 100 years down the road. And it's something that I truly believe in, is that the knowledge that our forefathers, our foremothers have brought up to this present, it is some that we can help our children with, and to move forward, to be successful, to be good people, and to take care of themselves, and to live a positive life and a successful life, and have them, by all means, to be happy. Thank you. And that's all I have. Any questions? Steve?
Robert, thank you so much. I could listen to you all afternoon. I was just soaking that up. Thank you very much. Really, really enjoyed listening, and a lot of information there. I know Robert had to really decide what he wanted to share because there was so much, and he knew we had a limited time. So, but we've got some time left for some questions and comments. I've got one comment in the chat box, so if you'd like to ask a ask a question of Robert or a comment, you can do that in the chat or unmute yourself. I'll open the floor.
Steve, there is a comment in chat. This is Ray from Frank Yasha that you might want to read.
Yes, thank you, Ray. I did see that. Frank asks, Robert, he asks, in order to keep it sacred, can you elaborate your view on smoke? Commercial tobacco use is dangerous, especially with diminished health, making vulnerability for COVID-19. So saying smoke for healing can be confusing, and it needs the message of distinction between sacred tobacco and commercial tobacco. It's a great question, and I too, Frank, had asked if Robert could elaborate on the mountain tobacco concept. So, Robert, any thoughts about this?
That's a good question, and it's one of those things. I guess the problem, or at least the question to answer that question, is most, at least in Navajo, mountain tobaccos you procure yourself or somebody procured it and has no commercial use to it. However, remember to use it, or at least my perspective, my individual perspective on this, is to keep it for its intention. You use it to address your mind. You have an intention to use it for, not just for to have a cigarette or for an addiction or habitual use or something like that. But mountain tobacco is really different because, or at least you have an intention to address a specific concern. Let's say you are confused today, or you're scared of some, or your mind is just all over the place. You use mountain tobacco to address that specific concern, not just to say, hey, I want to have a cigarette or a mountain tobacco. It's really to really refocus. And I think that's the big difference there between commercial use and sacredness. And I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Robert, for that. I appreciate that, and thanks for the question, Frank. Got another question coming in. I know Finley is asking about CEUs, and Finley, I will private message you about that. We do not offer CEUs for this type of event, but we do for other events where there are specific learning objectives. Judith P. asks, above all the mentioned ways, this is the question, Robert, above all the mentioned ways, do you have any additional suggestions for those who suffer with addiction?
One of the big issues that, or at least one of the things that I wanted to pass on, is that people with addictions, at least in my view, going back to the idea of that, we can pray for you all we want, we can conduct ceremonies all you want, but it is your decision. on how, if you want to follow it or not follow it. A lot of those decisions of being, and my thought is that addiction, there's no, at least from my thoughts on this, is that there's no cure-all to address addiction. However, there are resources, or at least traditionally, there are traditional ways to help you get through that, to get through with addictions. But the big thing that here is that, at least in my thought on this, my initial thought on this, is that you as an individual have the power to overcome that addiction. And you have things at your disposal to help get through that addiction. As long as you couple it with professional help. Because you can't have a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counselor with you 24/7. This presentation really was to tell that the individual has that power, but that power also is at their fingertips to help them get through that addiction. But it's not a guarantee. The bottom line is don't give up. And it is something that we continue to move forward with, and we continue to move forward as traditional practitioners, and as some that we continue to tell our people that, yes, very hard life sometimes, we make it a hard life, but that decision belongs to you, and how to, if you really, really want to, and so forth. But it is a decision, and it belongs to the individual if they want to get through it. There are medicinal plants, there are smokes to help them get through this stuff, to assist them in moving forward. In Navajo, there's Lifeway medicines. There are medicines that are dangerous, but there are also medicines that help you along those lines, and so forth. But in any case, I don't have that answer. But again, it is a resource, or at least it's at their disposal to access some of those healing powers. Thanks.
We have a lot of appreciative thanks coming in. There's some other great comments and questions too. Let's see if I can scroll back up. And a couple questions about certificates of participation. And yes, if you email me, I can arrange to have a certificate of participation at least sent to you. Robert, someone is asking if it's okay if they can contact you about possibly presenting for a group. I can, Cynthia, if you reach out to me at the center, I can forward your request on to Robert, and he can decide on that. Robert, if that's okay, I can forward that on to you.
Well, Steve, you can share my contact information.
Oh, great. Yes. Let me see if I've got it handy here, Robert. I just need to put it into the chat here. Yeah, there we go. I'll get that put into the chat here before we conclude, so that you guys can reach out to Robert if you have other questions for him. Let's see, there's another question. Catherine just states commercial tobacco is contaminated, not pure. Commercial tobacco companies add chemicals. Natural tobacco is just that, pure, unadulterated. It has a different taste and acts differently in the body. So, interesting comment. Thank you, Catherine. Shelley says, I appreciate your distinction between ceremonial and individual access to the power of the natural world. Are there ways the Navajo access this power healing in non-ceremonial community spaces?
Yes, And that's one of the things that I thought I I hope I had passed it on. But in any case, anywhere you are on the earth, maybe in the city, maybe out in the rural area or in the country or in the mountains, by all means access it. By accessing those powers and those healing powers, really rely on the people you trust, the knowledge that they pass on to you, and so forth. I understand that we have different tribes, different Native Americans, different non-Indigenous people that do a lot of this stuff. But also, but access to powers by how you were taught individually. You know, I might be Navajo, but I don't know everything about Navajo. I may practice a few ceremonies, but I don't know everything about all ceremonies in Navajo. But access those healing powers by the people that taught you how to do it. And the trust is a big issue here, and so forth. Thank you.
Mm. Let's see, I'm scrolling back through the chat. There's some great comments coming in. Chris says, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, your time and knowledge with us. Judith again says, thank you. I am an addiction professional and would like to incorporate Native teachings wherever it is possible. Frank comes back and says, I also feel obligated to share that I was taught commercial tobacco use for addiction is inhaled, whereas sacred is not inhaled, because holding in those prayers instead of blowing the smoke to be carried to the Creator is selfish, not how it is intended for, at least how it was taught by my roadman when I was a child. Coming through here and looking at some other comments. I have posted Robert's email contact for everyone in the chat. And I'm going to post my email as well. If you would like a certificate of participation, if that's something you require or request, I would ask that you email me and I'll have our comms team put something together for you. Just going to post that in here real fast. There's my email contact. Well, got a lot of Robert. We've got a lot of people thanking you for your time and your information, and I concur with that very much. We are just past the top of the hour. I do want to acknowledge a couple of people here in our audience. Ray Daw is here, one of our consultants and advisory board members with our American Indian Alaska Native ATTC. So Ray, always happy to have you here with us. And I also want to see if Perry Ground is still with us. I saw him earlier. Yes, Perry is in the audience. He is a former storyteller involved in our project. And Perry, it's great to see your name. And I know you're on the road and traveling, but just to have you here with us means a lot. So would love to hear from you in the second hour as we wind down this storytelling event and put some closure on things. So great to see you, Perry, and I'm hoping to see a couple of other previous storytellers join us. Oh, here comes Perry.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I just want to traveling, and sorry if it's cutting it out on me a little bit, but great to be a part of this group, and thankful that you invited me last summer when all of this Zoom was new to us. But hearing these powerful words today I think important, the entire series was really about finding those ways to connect our cultural identity to the healing that we all need, whether it's from addiction or other personal challenges that we are facing. We've all gone through a very difficult year or so. And Steve, I don't know if I actually told you, but it turns out I was actually much sicker when I was performing with you than we first believed. And I ended up having heart surgery in the fall based on the COVID that I had back in March. So, so I was actually much sicker, but used information like we learned in these sessions to get me through. And I'm now, once again, very healthy.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Perry. I'm glad you're recovering. And yes, I wouldn't have known it. You did such a wonderful job for us, and enjoyed your storytelling. Thank you for your comments and for being here today. I really appreciate that. I truly mean that. I'm honored to have you here with us. Yahweh, my friend.
Well,
Yahweh.
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And thank you also to Jim for originally getting us in touch with each other. And just so happy to sit in and be part of the group again today.
Thank you very much. Yahweh, my friend. Good to see you. Couple of other questions coming in. Some questions here. Yes. Tisha says, thank you and hope one day to incorporate this with my students. Tisha, it's always good to have you here. I know you've been a big part, a big steady attendee at many of these storytelling events and our talking circle events. So thank you. Thank you for being part of this event all the way through. I really appreciate that. Elsie says, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate the reminders of our Dene cultural teachings. So that's great. Thank you, Elsie, for being here. Lots of good comments, Robert, coming in. Edith asks, so will there be more meetings next year? I've learned so much and would love to continue to learn. Yes, I appreciate that. And we will, as we start to transition back to doing more live events and face-to-face events, we're sort of having to make some tough decisions about how to allocate resources and continue to provide events such as this. So I hope so, Edith. I just hope it doesn't take a pandemic to have us meet like this and create some events like this. So I appreciate your patronage and your comments. Other questions or comments, feel free to unmute. Ray, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to closing the event or your thoughts about. Oh, here, Atissa's saying something.
So it would be nice that if we did start going back in person, that somebody maybe record the presentation and have it posted on the website, just because I know that it takes multiple manpowers to produce both, but if they can both be offered, just because we've gotten used to distance learning from other places in the world and incorporating things once we start learning about different cultures and stuff like that, to incorporate it into our lives. That, I mean, we all can't travel to Washington, DC, or our companies don't send us to Portland, Oregon, or any place that we can all meet up in person. That would be nice, but just so that we can keep in touch and grounded and our spirits lifted with everybody's wisdom together. So, yep.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I agree. And there's got to be a way to do some hybrid events where we can also record and make those available. So it's a great suggestion. Thank you. Other comments or questions for Robert or for Perry? Well, here I see Perry's posting something. Oh yes, the Talking Turtle Stories. Yes, if you can go check that out. Find Perry on Facebook. He's got some great stories and really a lot of culturally rich education related to the Haudenosaunee tribes there. So thank you, Perry, for that comment. Yes, Cheryl, we are recording this event today, and we'll make it available on our YouTube webpage. So if you missed it today or have someone that wasn't able to attend, you can visit our Native Center for Behavioral Health YouTube archive, and we have all of the recorded events there. I was looking to see if we had some other previous storytellers perhaps join us, but I'm not seeing anyone. So I know everyone's very busy these days as we get back to doing more in-person meetings and events. Thank you, Catherine, for your comments in the chat. Yes, that's a great point. She says, patients seem to be able to remember the stories better than concepts. More effective way to pass on messages of recovery. I couldn't agree with you more. Even to build on that, I know as a practicing clinician for many years, I was acutely aware that patients often remember how they felt when they were with you, and rather than anything you discussed, but the feelings they had and connected to you also were very important. So that made me think about that, Catherine. Thank you for mentioning that. It's been a great experience for me, and I just again want to thank Robert for taking the time to share this series of stories with us about the Navajo culture and its people. I've learned so much, and Robert, I don't care what Ray says about you. You're okay in my book. I'm not going to listen to Ray anymore. Oh, now Ray was responsible for connecting me with Robert to make this possible. So hats off to both of you, gentlemen. Care for you both, and Ray, thank you for all the support and all that you do for our center. Yes, that's right. Ray's saying future topics could be sent to me, and we can certainly take those under consideration. There's Rick going on.
Well, with your comment about Robert and myself, Steve, you leave me little room to stay offline, but I want to extend my appreciation to my Che, Robert, and I see several Diné people online also with us. And yeah, Che, and do that formally. And as I was sitting here thinking about Robert's talk, it occurred to me that during this pandemic, one of the major areas of concern or an area that comes out. Am I still online? Nope. Oh, you closed your eyes and you kind of froze, Steve, so I wasn't sure if my internet went off. You muted. But one of the areas
I was just taking it in, Ray. I'm lucky enough to draw you onto camera, so I was just I was letting it wash over me.
Okay, you kind of froze there, and I was looking at you thinking, God, what happened to Steve? But I apologize to everyone for my hesitancy, but really, so in Robert's talk, he talked about the process of where we are as individuals. And during the pandemic, one of the themes that I keep hearing is the emotional, psychological effect of loneliness, which is, as I'm sitting here thinking about that in terms of how it's different from being alone, loneliness and being alone. And what Robert really nicely described is how in our way, being alone for us is a healthy process. And I'm glad that he talked about being alone when hiking, being alone when saying prayers or songs, and that's okay. That's good, actually healthy to do. And many, solitude, and in many cultures across the world, actually, the act of being alone is special. We call it meditation. We call it contemplation. I think lately there's mindfulness is another one that comes out as being talked about and taught about these days. But in many of our ways, the process of being alone is special. And that's what I wanted to bring up from Robert's Mike Che's talk, is that being alone is not the same as loneliness. And as he said, and I've heard him say this before, is that being alone is fine, but that doesn't necessarily make it possible to feel loneliness, because loneliness is when we withdraw ourselves from the world, each other, and ourselves. And loneliness in that sense is very harmful and unwell. It's an unwell practice, it's an unwell way to be. And to move from that to being alone and accepting that we are part of a larger world, and we are part of, right now with a group of 69 people here online. We're part of this group, and we might be alone in our offices or where we are, but we're not lonely that way. So I wanted to. I felt that this might be a good thing to bring out from what I heard Robert discuss, Mike Che discuss, from his insights and his experience. And I'm fortunate that I've been able to learn from and have Mike Che Robert share with me his perspective on these things. But as we move on to this pandemic, because we're not through it at all, and we're going to continue this virtual process. And I think this is where I get gratitude from my brother Steve, the opportunity to come in and be with others, and get remembered that I'm not to experience loneliness that way, and so I wanted to share those insights with you and others here that are online. Lakota ways. There's a fasting that happens when a few go to Sundance, or they go to Bear Butte to essentially meditate, and that's been common practice across many of our ways. So those are some thoughts I wanted to share right now, and kind of have others maybe talk about or share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. I appreciate your words, and there's been some comments too. Anyone else would like to comment on that, or anything that Robert shared, or anything else? We have a little time. We don't have to use the full second hour, but I keep watching and hoping maybe we'll get a couple of former storytellers joining us. Or maybe there are some storytellers among us that we don't even know about.
One of the things that I picked up from attending these things is I never was really told stories as a child. I mean, you've been told the basic stories, but I remember those because they were repetitive. But as an adult, I can see how important it is to native storytelling through storytelling and dancing, because those are things that stick with you emotionally, attach yourself to it. So, and during the pandemic, learning to be alone and not rely on others, since you couldn't go by others, is something that our culture is not used to, but also what we weren't taught to do very healthy. We are showed coping skills that were not usually positive. So I could see where those substance abuse usages and abuse in general skyrocketed during the pandemic. So I wanted to start with my students to start teaching them the ways, again, of grounding themselves to like Mother Earth and our teachings and stuff, just because that's the way I grounded myself. I was no longer allowed to go out dancing. I was no longer to go hang around with my auntie. And I was no longer allowed to travel to Anchorage to see friends. So those were my keys before the pandemic. And so I learned, I mean, I started doing new beadwork and grounding myself that way, but also going on hikes and stuff like that. So, but up here, the bears are active. So I've not been doing that so much by myself. I knew in Anchorage, there's the coastal trail that I love to go rollerblading on until I ran into 3 bears. And I would have one ear pod in and one ear out, so I can hear nature, but also to hear people tell me there's bears. So I would always ground myself with nature on that trail, though, until those sow and her 2 cubs were strolling, and I had no clue they were there. So, but yeah, it's good to instill positive rituals and song and dance. And I know a couple guys that are starting to write songs, so I wouldn't mind writing a song with our future dance group at our school about this whole process of COVID, because it has been a grieving process, and it still feels like 2021 hasn't settled down, but death and living and everything still continues even after the pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It's great to see you. Say hey to your mom too. I emailed her this morning, so I was hoping she might drop in and join us, but there's a nice comment in here from Martina. She said, "Thank you, Robert. I have never felt alone because our ancestors are always with us. And yes, people around us are with us at all times. Thank you for that."
And Steve, if I can, just real quickly, it's Perry again. And a little better connection. I was in the hills before, so it may have been breaking up. But as I was saying that I was sicker last year than I thought. but fortunately healthy now. Recently had the chance to go overseas to share some of my stories, and there was a mountain very close to where I was, and very well known in that area. So very unusual for me, but take time by myself to the top of the mountain. Home. First we came out of the woods, but and being a good friend, very much me to that place. So here I was in a place that I was not from, that was not familiar to me, but I was going to perform there. I was going to share my stories and my culture with people in a completely different new environment. And just being in nature, being by myself, being connected to that place, it really helped to ground me and connect me to that space so that I felt better, just better, I guess is a way to say it, an eloquent way to say it, but I felt better about sharing my stories and my culture and learning more about their history, their culture, and their stories as well by being connected to that environment. But it was also very helpful for me as someone who, there will always be some recovery that I'll be doing from the sickness, but to have that opportunity, like we heard about today, to have that kind of alone time, to have that I think very, very important.
Thank you, Perry. I appreciate your efforts. It sounds like you may be on top of the mountain now. Here we caught most of what you said, but you were going in.
Okay, well, good. Yeah. Well, always the problem when traveling. So.
I know. I really appreciate you taking the time though to be here. It means a lot.
No worries. Happy to be part of this group, and very much looking forward to being part of the group into the future for sure.
Well, we are just approaching the midpoint of the second hour, and again, I know folks may need to move on, but I wanted to open the floor again if anyone had a comment.
Kia ora na koutou ko koutou mai hui mai nei I tēnei rā. Tino nui te haere me te kōmo koutou hui mai nei. Now, if it looks like I'm in a mess, I certainly am, because I'm in my workshop where I'm listening to the words that have been spoken and I'm doing art at the same time. And it seems like the two are not in conflict. And in fact, that I can concentrate on both. So if you don't mind, and you can always tell me, that's enough, Ed, you've said enough. I wanted to share two stories. And I'm going to, when I do my art are my stories. They refer to my life and the stories that I learned when I was growing up in New Zealand, where I'm a member of the Ngāpuhi Iwi or Ngāpuhi tribe. Some of the stories about my life in Hawaii, where I spent my teen years, and some of my stories about me living here in Salt Lake City, Utah. Now, I'm not sure how well you can see this pot. Probably not that well, but it's called E Whā Ngapatu o te Taitokerau. And what that means is that Taitokerau, which is the isthmus or the piece of land in New Zealand that's north of Auckland City, that's called Taitokerau. And it says that Taitokerau is a building with 4 walls. And one of the walls is Te Rarawa. Another wall is Te Aupori. Another wall is Ngati Kahu. And the other wall is Ngati Whātua. Now, these don't look like walls, do they? They look actually like tails. But the tip of the North Island where I'm from, that end is also called the tail of the fish, because New Zealand is believed to have been a fish that was pulled out of the ocean by the explorer and demigod Maui. And so we in Ngāpuhi, my tribe, like to use that iconography a lot. So those are the 4 walls of Tai Tokerau, but the roof of Tai Tokerau is Ngāpuhi, which is my tribe. It's a little bit arrogant in a way, but yes, we believe that we are the roof that keeps all the other tribes connected. And so it's a story of connection, the second story that I wanted to tell. So when I was doing consultancy work up at Salish Kootenai College by Flathead Lake, on one of my trips, I was picked up from the airport by a gentleman in Missoula. So he drove me from Missoula up to Polson. And so we were driving along, getting to know each other. And then he pointed to the ridge of the mountains, right, that go up to Glacier National Park, all those mountains there. And he says, oh yeah, our people call that the backbone of heaven. And I says, okay, let me tell you a story. And the story goes that Anue nue te ala o kahiki I ka moana vehi vehi e ana pua o na kamakani e ha aloha kākau e aloha Hawaii ki nui Hawaii ki roa Hawaii ki pā mamau te ara o te wira o te rangi. So, you know, so that song came to my mind as he talked about the backbone of heaven, because our people in that song talk about one of our homelands, because our people were travelers. They've always been people that have migrated. And, you know, I think I saw something on TV last night that where people are beginning to recognize that some of the early people were far more sophisticated than the white world has given, has acknowledged, right? And including the Pacific people who navigated at least half the world. And one of our homelands on which our people live is called Hawaii ki tangata piki ki runga te iwi tuararo o te rangi, or our legendary homeland. Sorry, I get a bit emotional when I come to this part. Our legendary homeland, where our ancestors walked along the backbone of heaven, because we believe that our ancestors once lived in this amazing land, and that we walked along that backbone, and that tradition of the backbone is still held from some tribes. And I remember when I did research up in Sitka, I was comparing the culture of my people with the culture of the Tlingits and the Haidas, you know, and I had gone to the Field Museum in Chicago to see the Maori meeting house. It's in there, but it was closed. So I very dejectedly wandered around the museum, and I happened to wander into the Pacific Northwest exhibit. And I saw these cloaks that were identical to the cloaks that my people made in style. The only difference was, I think they used cedar bark, whereas we use flax, but they were identical. And when I got back to Salt Lake City, I said to my supervising professor, because I was a professor back then, I says, oh man, I need to go and see those Tlingits and Haidas up in up in Sitka in that part of Southeast Alaska. And behind my back, he arranged for me to go up there and do 8 weeks of research. The purpose of which was to see if there was any connection between the Maori people of New Zealand and the people that lived there, right? And I had my questions answered within 4 days of being up there. So I guess I could have spent the rest of the 8 weeks just playing around, but instead I got to know the people that live up there, including a lady who would weave cloaks. And I went over to her house and she showed me, you know, her technique. And I says, that's just exactly what we do, except we put feathers in where you put sea otter fur. Okay, they cut it into strips and weave it into their cloaks. And then when I saw the art, some of the carvings, you know, I took photos and I presented my findings down at the National Indian Education Association conference. And some of the friends that I had made up in Sitka came to my presentation. This was down in Albuquerque. And even they were amazed at the similarities. And on my last days in Sitka, I went over to the cultural center. You know, them Tlinkits are a little feisty. They're almost as feisty as Maoris, I think. And I had gotten to know one of the artists there. And so I went to say goodbye to him. And this is what he said. You know, we have stories about how some of our people headed out into the ocean and never came back. And, you know, Maoris, especially me, don't like to be outdone. So I said to him, yeah, well, we have some stories about how we left our Maori people behind. The point of the discussion was that we acknowledged a cultural connection, and where there are cultural connections, there are quite often biological connections. And so I have no doubt as I walk through this land that even though the spirit of the land that I inherited is from another place, that as I walk through this land, I do feel the spirit. And when the gentleman was talking earlier, so much of that connected with what I have to say. And so, yes, to us, this is the backbone of heaven. And there was quite possibly a time that we were once one people. And I'm going to end there. Kia ora na koutou, tēnā koe. That means I'm done.
Edwin, I'm still absorbing this information. Thank you so much. I saw you working in your shop yesterday during our talking circle and was so intrigued and wanted to ask you what you were working on. And I got part of that answered. Yes, that's the one you were working on yesterday. So thank you for sharing. And boy, I could listen to you all afternoon. So thank you.
And you know, like I said, these all represent stories. That's part of who I am, right? And this represents waves. So these are the waves of the North Ocean. And by the way, for Maoris, north is on the bottom, because in the south where we are, that's on the top. Okay, so these are the north waves and these are the south waves. That is what I captured in this particular piece. So thank you, Steve.
Other comments or thoughts? Again, thank you, Edwin, for that. That was unexpected and very honored to hear that story. We are at about 3:40 Central. We didn't need to use the full extra hour, but I wanted to reserve that in case we had some other storytellers arrive. And but it doesn't look like they were able to join us. So, and I know Perry had to step off. I want to give a big thanks again to Robert for his installment today, his sharing today in this last piece of our storytelling event. And want to thank Ray and others for supporting us throughout this this year-long endeavor during a very difficult and still difficult time. So I think we can wind things down. Everyone, I want to finally just thank everyone again for your support and your continued attendance at this event. We'll cross paths again, I'm certain of it. And until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.